looking very much at the significance of good design as part of the wider planning process. And in fact, I see it very much as embedded at the heart of the planning process. So in terms of who I am, you've heard the introduction. So my remit within Mid Devon is very much not just on planning, but also regeneration and economy as well. And then I'm going to be handing over in the next part of this session to Paul Brockway from Hyas Associates, who's our project lead on the Cullompton Garden Village. So I'm going to provide you first of all with a bit of context in terms of Mid Devon. Where is it? Who are we? What are we doing? But also then talking about, I'm going to be raising the NPPF again, and we've obviously got the new National Design Guide that's come out, so I'll be reflecting on some of that. Also talking about the commissioning of the Mid Devon Design Guide, which you're going to be hearing more on later on today, giving a few reflections and then passing over for a more detailed look at the Cullompton Garden Village project. First of all, Mid Devon. So for those of you that aren't familiar with where we are, well, the name gives it away basically. So we're sandwiched, if you like, between Exmoor National Park to the north, Dartmoor National Park to the south. It is pretty rural, but we do have the M5 corridor that runs through the district. We have the main peninsular rail line to the rest of the southwest. It's one of the largest authorities in the country, but also one of the smallest by way of population. But we're a council and an authority with ambition. We are very much looking to follow an agenda of clean growth. We have ambition in terms of raising everything from the wages of our population, greater life opportunities and life chances. And we've very much gone from what is probably a fairly insular rural local authority to very much looking beyond our own borders. So that, I think, is showing very much from us planning literally as a district alone to now working in very close association with our neighbouring authorities on the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan. And very much working with a city region ambition, looking at the area of Exeter's economic influence and the way in which we can actually deliver tangible benefits for our communities. But also very much looking at place, very much looking at a low carbon economy, developing that, innovation, connectivity, and shared prosperity going forward. In terms of other things that we are doing as a council, so we are currently undertaking a series of regeneration and investment master plans of our three main towns, Tiverton, Cullompton, and we'll be shortly starting off on the master plan for Crediton as well. So it's very much the council taking the opportunity of having some financial resources available to start to try and unpick what can be a positive and a very much an opportunistic reinvention really of our town centres, finding a new role for our high streets going forward and putting them very much at the heart of our community. So many high streets are struggling at the moment with vacancy rates, looking really to try and find a new role and a new purpose with changes in retail patterns that are very much emerging. And as a council, we're also very much looking at opportunities as they arise. So, for example, with government funding. So we've recently been awarded a High Streets Heritage Action Zone for Cullompton. This is particularly timely for us because Cullompton is one of the main areas of our strategic growth going forwards. And you'll be hearing a bit more about the Garden Village in close association with Cullompton in a moment. And it's making sure that we look at things holistically as well. So we're not just focusing on our Garden Village scheme, but are also looking at opportunities for the existing town of Cullompton as well, and particularly through the planned provision of a relief road, which the traffic in the middle of Cullompton at the moment is severely affecting its environment, the quality of the place, and it's not a place that you would necessarily want to visit, spend time, enjoy at the moment. The irony, of course, being that we've chosen a photo that has managed to not have any vehicles in it at all, but that's the exception rather than the rule. Master planning. We are also very much following a process of master planning our main areas of growth. And we have several urban extensions which are within our local plan process. So from Tiverton East, an urban extension, and an urban extension on the northwestern side of Cullompton as well. And we've taken a purposefully collaborative approach to those master plan documents, which have been adopted as supplementary planning documents, working very closely with the promoters and very much trying to make sure that we have a shared vision of the sort of quality of place that we're looking to achieve, and to bake that into that guidance. And I think another important factor that we've also taken the opportunity through those master planning sessions as well is to set our stall out very clearly in terms of what we're looking to achieve and the process. So we've embedded a design review process within the documents as well, so that there is a clear expectation that emerging schemes will go through the independent design review approach. As a council, we've also been quite opportunistic in looking to find means of providing badly needed infrastructure. So we've made bids under the government's Housing Infrastructure Fund and have been successful in two significant projects. A new junction to serve the Tiverton East Urban Extension, and I've mentioned a relief road for Cullompton as well. We're also proposing to bring a railway station back to Cullompton, and again to significantly help in terms of sustainable transport and travel patterns, and that will also help underpin some of the green planning, the future proofing of the Garden Village scheme. And we've also been quite ambitious in terms of a major site at junction 27 of the M5 in terms of a significant tourism and leisure allocation. So we're not really shy about our aspirations, but very much coming from the perspective of seeking high quality growth and development. Cullompton Garden Village, I'm not going to say any more about that. I don't want to steal Paul's thunder. But of course, one of the things that we are seeing very much from a planning perspective now is an emphasis from the government in terms of homes and the number of homes. You'll be familiar with the housing delivery test and the emphasis that that is now putting on local authorities to be responsible in part at least for the actual delivery of homes within their areas as well. So not just the planning for them, not just the enabling of them through the traditional planning process, but a greater emphasis on being accountable for delivery. Our delivery rates have actually gone up over the last few years, but there is still a significant difference between the number of planning permissions that are being granted for new homes and the build-out rates. And again, it's looking to try and understand why that might be the case, and make sure that we're actually able to deliver on our high-quality growth aspirations. And I think the final part in terms of sort of who we are and setting the context for you is, as a council, we've also got our own development company, fully owned by the council, called Three Rivers Developments. And there is a key site on the waterfront in Tiverton, owned by the council, which we took corporately the decision to hold a design competition. And that was won by Michael Riches. We liaised very much through REBA in terms of helping us through that design competition approach. And some of you will be familiar with Michael Riches, who of course have just been the winners of the Sterling Prize for their scheme in Norwich. So the planning process itself in terms of design, I was also going to reflect on the guidance within the 2019 National Planning Policy Framework. And I think the starting point is very much about, it's about our communities. It's about the places to live and work. It's going back, I think, to a real place-making agenda again. And what the National Planning Policy Framework does now, I think, in more detail than it has done previously, is it starts to talk about the processes as well as the overarching aspirations in terms of good design as well. So I think it strengthens the role of design guide, supplementary planning documents. It strengthens the role in terms of design review and the weight that can be given to advice through the design review process. And it talks about, obviously, plan making and the clear vision of the quality of design that should come through that plan making process. So we've already had reflection on paragraph 129 about having regard to the outcome and recommendations of design review panels. I think that can only be a good thing, that is now clearer. And I think we've also got some very clear advice here that refusal for poor design, and that poor design now is also design that doesn't make the most of opportunities of a site, of a proposal. And again, I think it comes back to understanding the context of a proposal and of a site. You'll be aware that the planning practice guidance has also been refreshed, and there's now a significantly greater amount within the main core of the guidance itself. But we've also, of course, seen the publication of a national design guide. And of course, what that national design guide does, I think, is come back to basics, really, but in a purposefully accessible manner. And I think what we're seeing is a greater emphasis on engagement with communities. So it purposefully tries to get away from using terminology that isn't accessible. There's a lot of explanation within the document as well. And what the government has been clear to do is to set out the context and the role of this, that it is a material planning consideration and should be read as part of the planning practice guidance, and of course hooking onto the guidance within the NPPF. So we've got within the document the government interpreting what constitute well-designed places. And I think it's interesting that there's a quote within it that good design should be fit for purpose, durable, and bring delight. This isn't anything new. This is very much a quote that is attributed to Vitruvius, so has been around for quite some time, but I think has almost been reinterpreted through this document. So is it a strengthened approach? I think it probably is, and I think one particular area that has been strengthened is an emphasis on design quality, not just at the formal planning stage itself, but also seeing that right the way through to the completion of the project as well, so that there is no watering down at subsequent stages. I've mentioned a greater emphasis on design review and also an increased role with stakeholders and engaging communities into that process as well. And I see it now as very much introducing a common language, an accessible common language about design. And I think for planning authorities, I think the result will be a greater confidence in decision making on design matters. But as I've set out in the slide, I think there are challenges for us. And I think one of the challenges, we still have this desire by the government to up housing numbers and an element of it being a numbers game. But clearly, we can't let it be all about numbers. It also has to be about quality, placemaking, community. Local authority resources and budget pressures, I think that's a uniform situation amongst different authorities. Yes, that does cause I think issues for us. Availability of design skills and design expertise. Not all authorities have got the ability to have that in-house. Application quality as well. The fact that there is still a significant proportion of applications, certainly in my part of the world, where a qualified design professional doesn't actually have any input into that application at all. So it may have been an agent who is not a design professional. It may have been, the plans may have been prepared sometimes by the agent themselves, sometimes by a plan drawer. And again, quality can be a real issue. And I think this is where engagement at a pre-application stage can really assist. But one of the things that I think is of particular concern, and I know has been given quite a lot of emphasis within the planning press recently, is permitted development rights and the expansion of permitted development rights and the fallback position that sometimes gives an applicant. And we've all seen headlines, as I've got there, about perverse situations where we have dwellings allowed which are clearly below the national size, the size standards. In this instance, have no windows. So we have an inherent tension, I think, within the planning system as it exists at the moment. So we have these permitted development rights, planning light, if you like, which aren't delivering the affordable housing, the play spaces, the outdoor amenity, and indeed the space standards that we would all wish for our homes. And I think that's a particular concern for the more vulnerable elements of our communities. But I think there is now some challenge to that. So I highlighted here the recent paper by the Town and Country Planning Association and the Association for Public Service Excellence, campaigning for the reform of permitted development rights. So I'm now briefly just going to come on to the design guide so that Mid Devon as a council we have commissioned. So we commissioned David Hawes from DHUD, Hilton Barnfield Architects and Hyas Associates, working in combination to provide a district design guide for us. Very timely, given the increased emphasis in the national design guide that good design and the criteria for it is most appropriately set out at a local level. So from our perspective, what were we looking to achieve through the commission? Something that was very accessible, easily understood and can be easily applied by all users in the planning process. And something that is very much reflective of place, of Mid Devon, of our local communities. To reflect our clear design priorities as obviously expressed through the policies in the development plan. But we were also very, very keen to get a greater emphasis on health and sustainability aspects. And we see it very much as complementing the other design-focused work and documentation that we've been developing. So during the commissioning and during the working up of the actual design guide itself, we've obviously seen a whole raft of councils now declare a climate emergency. So Mid Devon has also done that with some aspirations around achieving a target of zero net carbon by 2030. So one of the things that we've sought to do now is to go back and obviously start to try and embed some of those messages more firmly within the emerging documentation. Some of this I've already gone through, but I think we were looking very much with an approach to the design guide that also covered some more probably untraditional areas as well, and very much see it as a capable of being added to and adapted and to try and future-proof it to a certain extent. So very much designing for delivery and viability, but also accessibility and inclusiveness. Employment and commercial. We felt that often design guides focus very much on the residential side of things, less so on our commercial growth areas. I've mentioned climate change and carbon as well. So it was very much trying to take advantages of an opportunity that we had in terms of some budget to make sure that we updated the guidance that is available. So I'm going to finish on just a couple of quick reflections, really. So I think we've purposefully gone for quite a comprehensive approach in terms of trying to embed our aspirations for high quality, inclusive growth as a council. So I've given you a purposeful sort of range of some of the work and some of the publications that we've been undertaking. Yes, it's being opportunistic, so chasing government grants and government funding as it becomes available and aligns with what we're trying to achieve. So there's an element of agility that is required around that. But also, I think, understanding very clearly that each local authority these days, we're not working in isolation. It's working in partnership, be it with other authorities, other stakeholders, and also the development industry as well, so collaborative working. And setting our stall out really clearly about what we're looking to achieve so that everybody is very much aware of that. But I think finally it's really about having some drive and some commitment to what we are really looking to achieve. So championing, if you like, good design in the planning process. And then just finally, I quite liked this quote that I came across from a previous design seminar. I think an understanding that we're never finished. It's about place making, not place made, about it being a process. And there's always more that we can do, and we can, I think, probably challenge ourselves to always think about how can we actually do things better. Because at the end of the day, it's about achieving positive outcomes for our community, our existing community, and also our future communities.
I'm going to talk to you about Mid Devon's Garden Village. It's currently known as Cullompton Garden Village, partly because of its relationship to both the town of Cullompton and the River Culm. I spent about half my week working on that project for Mid Devon, leading the project, working with a small team that we have at Mid Devon who are working on the project, and looking to take it from where it was in 2017 with the designation through to hopefully being a fantastic place. But we'll tell you about how far we've got shortly on that. In terms of what I'm going to try and cover, the brief, the importance of good design in the planning process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that very briefly generally, to set a bit of context, but then particularly looking at garden communities and large-scale growth, which is, I suppose, my area of expertise and specialism. Talk to you about a brief history of the Garden Village, how we got to where we are today, some of the work that we've been doing around that, particularly around the design and the master planning process, and then a little bit of reflection on the design review process that we've just embarked upon with the Garden Village. So, one of those slides, always start with the picture. And you might wonder now, given my confession about being a planner, whether this is good design or bad design, just to put you at minds at ease, I suppose. Depends on your perspective a little bit, doesn't it? This one's probably a bit easier. This is actually a fairly recent photo from a fairly recently designated garden town. I actually know the regional director of the house builder responsible for this, and just to say they're not all, he's just as horrified by this as I think probably most people in this room are. He actually lives on this development, not in this bit, as you might not expect. But yeah, I suppose that's the type of thing that tells us why getting the design right is important for the people that are going to live there. I've shown this slide a few times. One of the times I've shown it, I think it was a councillor actually in the audience said, well, that's not too bad, is it? And again, I suppose it depends on your perspective. Design's one of those subjective things, isn't it? But I suppose that comment made me think, and I thought, well, maybe it isn't, but is that what we're aiming for? Good enough? Not too bad? Or is the importance of design trying to aim a little bit higher than that? And particularly given the brief, what we're supposed to be talking about today, in terms of garden villages, garden communities, and if we're going to be setting that benchmark with those types of places, and just generally, you know, we see a lot of this, don't we? And maybe it is, okay. A few images of things which you might think are a bit better. I'm not going to go through all of these individually, don't worry, but, you know, a few, I suppose, contemporary and historical examples. Some of you might recognise some of those places, you know, of where good design might be doing it a little bit better. And I suppose a bit of a personal reflection. Whenever I go to a nice place and I stand around and think, well, why do I like this place? Why do I think this is good? It's usually the public realm, which is the thing that makes the difference, you know, whether it's been designed well, whether it's been done well, whether it's just the attention to detail. So it's public spaces, how they're designed, how they're implemented, and also then how they're looked after. But these are all pictures of things which have been done, things which have been built, things which were existing. And I suppose, given the brief for the talk in terms of the planning process, as planners, and designers in the planning process, the point where it gets to. By the way, I don't know if you can see that from the back. In case you can't, that's not a photograph, that's a CGI. So just better explain that, otherwise this next point won't make as much sense to you. From a planning perspective, in the planning process, is probably about as close as we get to seeing some of this stuff, probably, and having to use our imaginations, because a lot of the time, when we're thinking about design, we're thinking about it in this context, in the planning process, in terms of 2 dimensions. So kind of outline applications, framework plans, key phases, and then maybe reserve matters with a few axonometrics and that type of thing. And I suppose the point is, at least I think, in terms of the importance of design in the planning process, if we are going to not do some of the earlier things, which you won't go back very quickly, then it probably does start earlier on at this point in terms of the planning process, and particularly, again, given the scope of what I've been asked to talk about, if we're talking about garden communities. Historically, that's what has been said about them, particularly in terms of people like TCPA. Holistically planned, enhancing the natural environment, high quality, beautiful, healthy, and sociable communities. So that's the target. But not just about new homes, lots of other things to do. It's interesting, for the Cullompton Garden Village, we did a workshop last week looking at what the potential for the employment and the economy might be at the Garden Village. And it's interesting how often design came up in that conversation. So we had a room full of local employers, local skills providers, local education providers, and they were talking about, okay, if you've got a garden village and you want to be attracting certain types of employers to this area, they're going to want nice buildings. They're going to want nice buildings for their workforce. They're going to want nice buildings for them to live in, to work in. They're going to want a nice environment. So getting the design right across all those different facets, I think, and we think, with the Garden Village project, is pretty important to making a great place. Moving on now to the Garden Village itself, a bit of the brief history. So probably some of you, many of you, will already know a bit about this, so I'm not going to dwell too much, but the government's sort of contemporary thinking on garden communities started around about 2016 in earnest, a little bit earlier, 2014, with a series of prospectuses that they launched looking for expressions of interest from places that wanted to do new garden communities. Within those documents, a little bit more in the 2018 one, but certainly in the earlier ones that Mid Devon responded to, there wasn't a lot of guidance from the government as to what that might mean. In fact, pretty much it was left to each place to work out what it should be in its own context. Words like, creating a distinct identity, reference to it being well designed, but not a great deal of instruction as to what that might be and how that might be achieved. And Cullompton was successful. In terms of making that expression of interest, or Mid Devon was successful for Cullompton in terms of making that expression of interest. And it was one of the first 14 garden villages that was announced, I think it was New Year's Day actually, in 2017, slow news day, so get that announcement out. But why at Cullompton? Some things there, I suppose. It's a pretty accessible place. Jenny's already mentioned the sort of the context. If you can see in the bottom right-hand corner down there, it's kind of halfway between the town of Taunton, city of Exeter. It's bang on the M5 motorway. You've also got the main West Coast Railway line there. And at the moment, it looks pretty much like that. Green, open, farmland in the main, pretty flat. Not without its constraints, though. The picture earlier I showed you of the pylons. We have pylons across the Garden Village site as well. 2 of them, actually, 2 pylon runs. One high voltage, one slightly lower. So we're going to have to think a bit more imaginatively, hopefully here, than they did in the other place that I showed you about how we're going to deal with those. Dotted clusters of farmhouses. I've pictured those because they're both listed. So we do have some constraints to talk about as well. Bottom right-hand corner, that's the main east-west road. That's the road from Cullompton across to Honiton and the A303. So there's a few things to think about in terms of the design of this place going forward, and its relationship with the nearby town of Cullompton. That and the top picture is the M5 motorway. Next to it, to the left of it, you can see the railway line. Just to the right of it, through the curvy line of trees, that's the River Culm. all three of which we're going to need to find a way of getting over to make the connections with the existing town of Culm, which you can see in some of the photos towards the bottom there. So we have a context. We're very, and there's a lot of local support for this project. A lot of that is contingent upon and comes from the residents of the town of Cullompton. So we're being very mindful that we've got to create a new place with a distinct identity at the same time as making it synergistic with the existing town of Cullompton, complementary to and supportive of, and so they work together potentially as one whole. The long-term plan, as set out in the expression of interest, is to create something of around about, or up to, let's get my words right, up to 5,000 new homes with a range of supportive facilities. I mentioned, the improved links to the M5 and across there into the town of Cullompton. Jenny's already touched on the new railway station. The diagram on the right, and this is where I have to resist the temptation to sort of go into full planning geek and talk about policy and other things, but it is quite important in terms of the context. The red line on the right-hand side is what is currently identified in the emerging Mid Devon local plan review as an allocation for what's known as east of Cullompton. The green sort of wash that sits around it is the potential larger area. So when we're talking about the up to 5,000, that's the green wash area or something like that. Something like that because that will find its place in planning policy through the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan. Otherwise known, and if I refer to it again as GESP, that's what I'm referring to. So the strategic planning document that's coming forward. So we have an overall ambition for a garden village, which in planning policy terms is sort of a game of two halves, in that we have a great deal more planning certainty around the first bit, because the Mid Devon local plan emerging allocation identifies it for 1,750 homes in the plan period, which is to 2033, with at least another 850 thereafter. So rough maths, 2,600, got more planning certainty, 2,400 to follow, a little bit less planning certainty. In design and master planning terms, that's reasonably an important context because the emerging Mid Devon local plan side of things requires us to do a relatively detailed piece of work at this point in the process in terms of a master plan SPD. So that's for the yellow area, which is in the bottom right-hand side there, or the furthest right one. The top left picture was the diagram that went into the expression of interest, showing that broader ambition for up to 5,000. So in terms of that planning and master planning and design process, we've taken a view at the moment that we're going to have a single process to look at the whole of the garden village, so that whole ambition of up to 5,000. Lots of reasons why we're going to do that, but the best way to, I suppose, or the way I often refer to it is in terms of education. If we're just looking at the area within the red line, the sort of 1750, probably don't need a new secondary school on that side of the motorway. If we're looking at up to 5,000, probably do need a new secondary school on that side of the motorway. So if we know longer term we're going to need a secondary school on that side of the motorway, probably should be thinking about it sooner rather than later. So we're doing a single process now, looking at the whole, but we're recognising that we're going to have more than one output being produced at the same time. So we're looking at a sort of strategic vision and concept for the whole, as well as a more detailed piece of work for the area within that red line. And so that's what we've done. Consulted on earlier this year was a vision and concept, and then the bottom right-hand document is that the sort of an issues and options stage for that master plan SPD. You won't be able to read that, but that is just to prove that we do have a vision. And I suppose the point on this slide is more that supporting that vision, we've got what we've identified as sort of 9 key principles. One of which talks about it being locally distinctive and well designed. But I suppose the point to make here, again, going back to some of the points that I made at the outset, is that none of those principles, whether it be well connected and integrated, whether it's talking about, as I've mentioned, ambitious employment opportunities, whether we're talking about things being future-proofed and sustainable and resilient to climate change, all of those have, good design, and getting the design right is cross-cutting and fundamental to all of those, delivering all against all of those principles, and therefore the ambition as a whole. And that's quite a blobby, diagrammatic representation. So that's where we've got to in sort of, putting the concept down on a piece of paper at the moment. And again, the red line's on there because really, what we're trying to do here is ensure that we've got a kind of a nested approach to this master planning process, sort of Russian dolls, if you like, so that whatever we're doing now in that more detailed stuff within the red line sits within and won't preclude and works consistently and is complementary to that wider ambition. So the two things will flow neatly into one another. And that's pretty much as far as we've got in terms of the design at the moment. There is some more detailed stuff in the master plan SPD, which I'm not going to go into today. They're all available for you to have a look at online. I'll put some links on the last slide before we get there. But one thing I did want to mention was the role of the community, and Jenny mentioned it in terms of some reflections from a local authority perspective in terms of where we're going with design at the moment. One of the earlier slides I showed had a little quote in the bottom corner which talks about this being locally led and not developer led. This project does benefit from a lot of local support. That is very much driven by the belief, which we're working very hard to support, that this will be a project which is designed by and delivered by and for the community, and that they will have a real role in working out what it should be and how it should be and how it should function going forward. We spent a lot of time over the last 2 years working with the community in all different guises to enable that and to produce that. So a lot of that conceptual work, a lot of the thinking, a lot of the words and the text and the ideas have gone into those visions, have been generated at grassroots level by the work that we've done with various groups in the community. And the diagram, a little bit drier, but just I suppose the point here is that what's enabled that is quite a strong and robust approach to the governance for the project as a whole. So the reason that we've been able to formulate and secure all of that input from the local level is because we've got quite a structured approach to providing and generating all of that input. So we've got a delivery board, we've got a project team, but around that we've got a whole series of working groups and work streams and different forums where we can get and gather all of that input. And into that process we've also been using design review to help steer that project. So as well as getting all of that bottom-up local input, we've also been utilising the skills and experience of the design review process and the professional input as much as we can. Those aren't pictures from Cullompton because I couldn't find any in time. Those are from another project which we're working on, which is another garden village, which is at Carlisle. But the point remains the same, which is that we see very much the design review process as being utilised very early and as early as possible in both of these projects to get maximum benefit so that we can gather all of the available experience and skills and knowledge from all of those professionals to help steer these and shape and guide these projects. And I suppose it's whether it's an evolution, whether it's an extension, or whether it's just good practice, but I think one of the things which we've been keen to do with both of these projects that I mentioned and others too is to reimagine maybe the design review process and maybe to have more emphasis on the design and less on the review. So in both of those examples, what we did was sort of constitute more workshop-based environments where we got people in around a table. There wasn't actually a great deal of information to look at and review. It was more sort of site-based. We went out, did site visits, and then got together with those professionals and with some members of the community and with some of their representatives, including members, and actually workshopped it through over a few sessions. And we're going to do that on an iterative basis. We've got a commitment from the panel that we're going to use the same people, so we're going to get the same professionals back in the room, and so we can get that consistency of thought and process and actually have the design review skills and expertise as an integral part of the design evolution of the project as it goes forward, hoping to maximise, as I said, the knowledge and the skills and the expertise that we've done there. So that's where I'm going to end. That was a quick flip through the history of the Garden Village from where it started to where we've got to now. And happy to take questions on that when we get to the questions section on the end. I mentioned... There we go. My direction's out of here. But just to say from Jenny and I, thank you very much for listening. There's some contact details there, and I mentioned at the bottom some links to some more information about the Garden Village if you want it. It has its own website, which is fantastic, and all that information that I've been putting up is on there as well, and it's even got its own email address, so you can send us all your best wishes and thoughts. But thank you very much.